On a chilly autumn evening in the heart of the city, Hans Scrooge shuffled along the empty streets, his cane tapping against the cobblestones. The night was silent, save for the whisper of wind threading through the branches above. With a sneer curling his lips, Hans glanced over his shoulder as he passed a familiar building, a synagogue, its stone facade bathed in the golden glow of streetlights. Most would walk by with indifference or even respect, but not Hans. For years, bitterness had twisted his heart, and he found a perverse satisfaction in petty acts of spite. The synagogue had been his latest target, left marked by graffiti designed to wound, an act fueled not by ignorance, but by malice. Hans had not acted alone. His companion in these hateful endeavors had been Horace, a man whose scowl matched his own, whose laughter was as cold and sharp as broken glass. Together, they had found camaraderie in their shared cruelty, their friendship forged in the fires of resentment and contempt. But now, Horace was gone, his life snuffed out in the fading light of a sunset, leaving Hans alone in the world. His only friend now, just a memory. The death of Horace had not softened Hans. If anything, it had hardened him further, like iron left too long in the forge. He dismissed sympathy, scoffed at the rituals of grief, and turned his anger outward, blaming the world for his loneliness. The city around him bustled with preparations for the coming holidays, but Hans felt only annoyance at the joy he saw in others. He scowled at the laughter of children, rolled his eyes at the songs drifting from open windows, and muttered curses under his breath. That night, Hans returned to his narrow, dimly lit apartment, tossing his coat onto a chair and settling into his favorite armchair by the window. He poured himself a small glass of brandy, savoring the warmth as it burned down his throat. The city outside was alive with light and sound, but within his four walls, all was silent and cold. Hans felt a chill creep up his spine, but he dismissed it as the effects of the changing season. As the clock struck midnight, an unnatural stillness fell across the room. The outside noises faded, replaced by a low, mournful wail that seemed to seep through the walls themselves. Hans straightened in his chair, his heart beating a little faster. The wail grew louder, accompanied by the soft rattle of chains. Then, from the corner of the room, a figure began to materialize, a shape at first indistinct, but gradually resolving into a form Hans knew all too well. It was Horace, or rather what was left of him. His eyes, once sharp and mocking, now burned with a strange, unearthly light. Chains hung heavy around his shoulders, each link inscribed with symbols Hans did not recognize. His face was drawn, his mouth twisted in a grimace of pain and regret. The air grew thick with the scent of old dust and sorrow. Hans recoiled, his brandy sloshing over the rim of his glass. "Horace?" he whispered, his voice trembling despite himself. The spirit's gaze fixed upon him, cold and unyielding. "Hans Scrooge," Horace intoned, his voice echoing as if spoken from the depths of a cavern. "You have been chosen." Hans tried to muster a sneer, but the sight of his old friend, bound and haunted, left him shaken. "Chosen for what? Another round of your ghostly theatrics?" Horace's chains rattled as he moved closer, his eyes never leaving Hans's. "Chosen for judgment," he replied. "The three ghosts of Yom Kippur will visit you, each bearing the weight of your deeds. They come not to punish, but to show you the truth that you have spent a lifetime ignoring." Hans scoffed, but the sound rang hollow in the cold room. "Ghosts, you say? And what then? Am I to be frightened into repentance by a parade of phantoms? Buski!" Horace's expression hardened. "This is not a jest, Hans. My own soul is lost, damned by the hatred I carried. But you, there is still a chance for you. Redemption waits, but only if you open your heart. Only if you see the pain you have caused and find it within yourself to change. The day of atonement approaches, and with it, your last chance." Hans felt a surge of defiance, a familiar heat rising in his chest. "Redemption? You expect me to kneel, to beg forgiveness from those I despise? I am no coward, Horace." The spirit shook his head, sorrow etched into every line of his spectral face. "Cowardice is not in refusing to beg, but in refusing to see. The ghosts will show you the truth, Hans, past, present, and the shadow of what may come. If you do not listen, if you do not change, Eternal damnation awaits you, as it has claimed me. A hush fell over the room, the words hanging in the air like a shroud. Hans could feel his heart pounding, a cold sweat breaking out on his brow. Still, he would not let fear rule him. He forced a laugh, harsh and brittle. "I've lived my life as I pleased, Horace. I'll not be frightened by bedtime stories." The spirit of Horace gazed at him a moment longer, the light in his eyes flickering with the embers of hope and despair. "The choice is yours, Hans. But remember, your soul is weighed not just by your beliefs, but by your actions. Tonight is only the beginning." With that, the room grew suddenly cold, as if all the warmth had been sucked away. The ghost of Horace began to fade, his form dissolving into mist. The chains rattled one last time, echoing long after he was gone. Hans sat alone, the silence pressing in on him. Though he tried to dismiss the encounter, to convince himself it was nothing but an old man's fancy, he could not shake the chill that lingered in his bones. In the darkness, he told himself it was nonsense, that he would not be cowed by threats of judgment. But deep within, a seed of doubt had been planted, and as the night wore on, Hans found himself staring into the shadows, waiting for the first of the promised ghosts to appear. The hush of twilight settles over Hans's house like a heavy velvet curtain, cloaking every corner in uneasy silence. Yesterday, the laughter of children and the gentle clatter of family dinner filled this space. Tonight, the emptiness gnaws at him, sharp as regret. His wife's words echo in his mind, their sharpness undiminished by the hours that have passed. "You squander money on luxuries and poison," she had cried, voice trembling, "on hatred, not bread. If only you'd act as a Jew. Do good in the name of God." Her parting glance lingered longer than her footsteps as she gathered their children and left him alone, her hope for his atonement hanging like a challenge in the air. He had mocked her, laughed off her plea, but now, as darkness deepens, his bravado withers. One by one, the lights in the house blink out, as if unseen hands snuff them. Shadows stretch and dance across the walls, pooling in every corner. The sudden silence is absolute, until a crackle, like the kindling of a fire, splits the gloom. From the heart of the room, flames spiral upward, twisting into the shape of a man, an artist, his features marked by both suffering and resolve. His eyes burn with the intensity of old canvases and ancient prayers. Hans shrinks back, fear rooting him to the spot. The apparition's voice is both gentle and fierce, as if every word is a brushstroke on Hans's soul. "Are you frightened, Hans?" the spirit asks, embers flickering in his beard and eyes. Hans tries to muster a retort, but the words catch in his throat. He nods barely. "You should be," the spirit intones. "This is the night of reckoning. You will be visited by 3 spirits. I am the first, the ghost of Kippur past." Hans trembles. The room feels colder, as if the ghost's fire has drawn all the warmth from the air. With a wave of his hand, a single lamp flickers to life, casting a narrow circle of light. Within it, scenes from Hans's past begin to flicker and swirl, as if summoned by the spirit's will. Hans watches, helpless, as he's drawn into these visions. First, he sees himself slipping into the back row of a synagogue. The rabbi's voice rises and falls in prayer, the congregation swaying in time. Hans, in his memory, makes crude noises, disrupting the sacred rhythm, snickering as congregants glance back in confusion and irritation. The vision shifts, and he's in another synagogue, this time actively seeking to annoy, his actions more brazen, his laughter more callous. The ghost's voice reverberates, sorrowful. "Do you remember the sting of your words? The discomfort you sowed in a place of peace?" Before Hans can reply, another scene unfolds. Outside, under the gray sky, children in kippot walk together, their faces bright with innocence. In this memory, Hans picks up a stone. He remembers the cold weight in his palm and hurls it. The children scatter, shouts of fear echoing. The kippah, a symbol of humility and reverence, lies forgotten on the ground. Hans tries to avert his gaze, but the spirit's grip is unyielding. "You wounded not only bodies but spirits," the ghost says. "Each act leaves a mark. Each cruelty echoes." The light dims. For a moment, there is only darkness and the soft hiss of the spirit's flame. Then, new images ignite, this time of Hans and his wife. They walk side by side, laughter and affection lighting their faces. but the warmth curdles as the scene shifts. Hans hangs a poster on their wall, the words "Adolf Hitler was right" scrawled in black. His wife's face crumples in pain and disbelief. Tears stain her cheeks as she turns away, clutching her children. The spirit regards Hans with piercing eyes. Do you feel sadness, guilt, Isu? Hans hesitates, the bravado of earlier slipping away. Maybe a little bit, he murmurs. The ghost smiles, a bittersweet curve. Perhaps this shall convince you, Hans. The flames swirl, painting new images in the air. Now Hans sees the rolling deserts and crowded cities of the Middle East. The year is 1948. The fledgling state of Israel is proclaimed, a refuge for a people scarred by centuries of exile and persecution. He sees the chaos, the desperate struggle, the surrounding nations threatening to destroy what has barely begun. Yet the Jewish people endure, building and defending their home against overwhelming odds. The spirit's voice softens, yet trembles with the weight of history. Despite all that opposed them, the Jewish people rose from the ashes of catastrophe and claimed their right to exist. In the face of annihilation, they built, they hoped, they survived. Hans scoffs, unable to contain the bitterness that has shaped so much of his life. What would you do if someone stole your home by killing your family? He sneers. The ghost's eyes blaze with disappointment. You laugh, Hans, even now. You see only your own pain, never the pain you've caused. You judge without understanding, but judgment is coming. He takes a deep, shuddering breath, the flames around him flickering with sorrow. I wish you luck with the next spirit, Hans. When the clock strikes midnight, seek the quiet corner near the city center. There, the ghost of Kippur present will find you. I hope, for your sake, you listen, truly listen, before judgment arrives. This is no time for laughter, but for reflection. With that, the spirit's fiery form dissolves, leaving Hans alone in the darkness. The silence feels heavier than before, pressing down on him, a weight of memory and regret. Outside, the world stirs on the eve of Yom Kippur. Across the city, Jewish families gather to reflect, to seek forgiveness, to hope for renewal. Their prayers rise with the night, carried on winds of tradition and longing. Inside his house, Hans sits in the hush, haunted by what he has seen and what is yet to come. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty breaks through his defenses. Is it possible, he wonders, to change the course of his life? To atone for the pain he has caused? To become something better? The clock ticks steadily toward midnight, and Hans waits, the shadows shifting, his heart uneasy, as the journey toward atonement continues.
Hans wandered through the heart of the city, its streets blanketed in a hush that felt almost sacred. The night was thick, heavy with the kind of silence that makes each footstep echo against stone and glass. Though the city was usually alive with movement and voices, tonight it slept, as if the spirit of Yom Kippur itself had pressed pause on the world. Hans, lost in thought and stubbornly alone, made his way toward the city center, drawn by an unease he couldn't quite explain. When Hans arrived at the central square, he found himself at a quiet corner. There, opposite him, loomed the silhouette of a synagogue, its ancient stones washed silver by moonlight. He paused, feeling the weight of its presence, a silent witness to centuries of faith and sorrow. It was there, in the shadow of the synagogue, that Hans first heard a voice, soft, almost playful, yet tinged with something old and profound. "Have you ever heard a Jewish prayer?" the voice asked, as if spoken from the folds of darkness itself. Startled, Hans turned. Standing before him was a figure unlike any he had ever seen, a Jewish spirit, disheveled and eccentric, resembling a drunken author. In one hand, the spirit gripped a battered prayer book, its pages worn from years of touch and tears. In the other, he held a cup of fresh wine, dark and rich, swirling with memory and meaning. "Will you drink?" the spirit offered, extending the cup. Hans hesitated and politely declined, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The spirit smiled. "I am the ghost of Kippur present," he announced, his voice rising and falling like the ancient melodies of Jewish prayer. "Come with me." Compelled by something deeper than reason, Hans followed the spirit through the synagogue's heavy doors. Inside, The sanctuary stretched out empty and quiet, the air thick with the echoes of prayers long since spoken and the silent yearning of generations. Stained glass windows glimmered faintly, casting colored shadows across the walls where pictures and symbols told the story of Jewish belief. Stars of David, menorahs, and words written in Hebrew. "Look," the Spirit urged gently. "See what these walls hold. Each image, each symbol is a thread in the tapestry of Jewish life. And above all, remember this. Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. This is the heart of it all." Hans stood transfixed, tears welling in his eyes. The words struck him with the force of revelation. He found himself longing, desperate to turn back the clock, to witness firsthand the beauty and depth of Jewish prayer. "Please," Hans whispered, his voice trembling, "let me see it. Let me feel what I have ignored." The Spirit, moved by Hans's plea, raised his prayer book and murmured ancient words. Suddenly the synagogue was flooded with light, not just from candles and chandeliers, but a radiant, otherworldly brilliance. Joy and warmth filled the air as the sounds of countless prayers reverberated through the sanctuary, rising in waves of music and devotion. Voices joined together, weaving a melody that transcended language and time. "Do you hear it?" asked the Spirit, his eyes shining. Hans nodded, his fear mingling with awe, his heart pierced by a strange, tragic joy. The prayers washed over him, not just entering his ears, but stirring something deep within his soul. "These prayers," said the Spirit, "are meant not just for the ears, but for the heart. That is where true change begins." As Hans closed his eyes and let the sounds envelop him, the light slowly faded, replaced by creeping shadows. The sanctuary grew cold and dim, and Hans realized he was not alone. Two figures appeared before him, Christian teenage boys, their faces marked by the innocence of youth and the menace of misunderstanding. "These are want and ignorance," the Spirit intoned, his voice now grave. "Beware, Hans. They are the very embodiment of all anti-Semitism found in the hearts of men." Want stepped forward, his hand clutching a knife. His eyes were hungry, hollow. "Are there any Jews left to consume?" he hissed, echoing the violence and greed that has haunted Jewish communities throughout history. Ignorance followed, clad in the attire of a protester on the bustling streets of New York. His words dripped with accusation. "Are there no Jews to blame for occupation of lands?" Ignorance's voice was amplified by the power of misinformation and prejudice, the tools that have perpetuated discrimination for generations.
Hans stood motionless, his body racked with sobs, as the last echoes of the Spirit's vision faded into the heavy silence of the night. Tears streamed down his face, unrelenting, as if the dam of his heart had finally broken, releasing the torrent of remorse and sorrow he had long kept hidden. The apparition of want and ignorance, transfigured into the cruel shape of anti-Semitism itself, had vanished, but the bitter taste of their message lingered. Hans was left trembling, his mind racing, his soul exposed and raw. He turned desperately to the Spirit, his voice choked and uncertain. "Have mercy," he pleaded, the words barely audible over the sound of his grief. "Please, show me there is hope." "I did not know, I did not understand." The ghost of the present regarded him with an expression both compassionate and severe, eyes glinting with the wisdom of ages. With a subtle gesture, the world around Hans began to dissolve. The familiar warmth of the synagogue faded, replaced by a cold, sictral emptiness. The walls, once adorned with the beauty of stained glass and the gentle glow of candlelight, crumbled slowly, as if time itself had accelerated. Ashes swirled in the air, settling on Hans' coat and in his hair, a tangible reminder of loss and destruction. Hans staggered backward, clutching his chest, as the last remnants of the sacred sanctuary collapsed into a pile of blackened rubble. The sorrow he felt was almost unbearable. He had worshipped here, heard the voices of generations rise in prayer, and seen the hopes of a community woven together in faith. Now, all that remained was dust and memory. "Why?" Hans asked, voice trembling, eyes wide with fear and confusion. "Why must the synagogue burn? If my heart has changed, if I seek to be better, why must this pain persist?" The Spirit's voice was somber, echoing with the gravity of divine decree. Hans, your heart has indeed begun to change. You have seen the consequences of hate, felt the weight of ignorance, and recognized the suffering it breeds. Yet, the transformation of one soul, though noble, cannot erase the scars of history nor undo the harm that has been wrought. The synagogue must burn, not as punishment, but as a sign, a testament to the enduring power of Elohim, the Jewish God who rules all that exists. It is a reminder that every act of hatred, every word of scorn, leaves its mark not only on those who suffer, but on the world itself. Only through ashes can new hope rise. Trembling beneath the weight of his sorrow, Hans listens as the Spirit gently reminds him that even a changed heart cannot erase all that has been lost. The synagogue's destruction, the Spirit says, is not vengeance, but a testament to the enduring presence of Elohim, whose will extends beyond human understanding. With heavy steps, Hans is urged onward, told to seek the city's darkest paths, where his fate will rest in the hands of the ghost of Kippur's future, known as the Angel of Death.
Hans Scrooge wandered alone through the winding streets of the old suburb, his footsteps echoing against slick cobblestones as rain began to fall, cold and relentless. The storm had settled over the city, thunder rumbling like a distant drum, and the world seemed to draw closer, shadows stretching long and thin across the narrow alleys. Each step he took felt heavier than the last, burdened by the memories the ghost of Kippur present had forced him to confront. The windows of silent homes stared out at him, their glass dark and impenetrable, as if the very soul of the neighborhood had turned away from his presence. Hans pulled his coat tighter, shivering, not just from the cold, but from the dread that had begun to seep into his bones. The rain poured harder, rivulets tracing their way down the ancient walls, the thunder above splitting the sky. He found himself at the entrance of a particularly narrow passage, hemmed in by crumbling brick and flickering lamplight. The air grew heavier, thick with anticipation, and something darker, something that seemed to whisper of endings. He walked on, uncertain, until a sense of foreboding halted him. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath. Hans turned, heart pounding, and there, emerging from the deepest pool of shadow, stood a figure cloaked in black, a hood drawn low over a face that was nothing but emptiness. In one skeletal hand, the figure grasped a scythe, its blade glinting with a chilling sharpness, reflecting every stray bolt of lightning that split the sky. Hans stumbled backwards, tears mingling with the rain on his cheeks. His voice, little more than a mumble, barely rose above the storm. Are you the spirit who shows what may yet come to pass?" His words trembled, not with hope, but with terror, every syllable a plea for mercy. The reaper did not speak. Instead, the hooded figure raised its scythe and pointed toward a wall at the edge of the alley. The wall, battered by time and weather, became illuminated by a flickering, unnatural light. Hans stared as shadowy figures began to take shape upon the surface. They moved and danced, silhouettes of those he recognized, his wife, his children, neighbors who had once greeted him warmly. Their forms flickered, shifting between joy and sorrow, their laughter echoing in the rain-soaked air. For a moment, Hans felt something unfamiliar stir within him. Hope. He watched as his family gathered, their shadowy arms linked, faces turned toward one another in celebration. He imagined a future where he was forgiven, where his next birthday would bring about a reunion, where love, once lost, could be found again. The possibility of redemption shimmered before him, fragile and inviting. But then, as lightning struck again and again, the shadows began to change. The celebration faded. One by one, the figures joined hands and bowed their heads, their voices rising in a solemn chant, the ancient words of the Kaddish, the prayer for the dead. Hans felt his heart clench. He watched powerless as the scene unfolded. The prayer, haunting and beautiful, filled the air, each syllable a reminder of mortality and loss. Hans turned to the reaper, desperation in his voice. "Who has died? he cried, his tears now flowing freely. The figures on the wall laughed, a hollow, echoing sound, and slowly faded away, leaving only darkness behind. Hans spun around, searching for comfort, for answers, but found only the Reaper's cold gaze. The Angel of Death extended one bony finger and pointed directly at Hans. Hans fell to his knees, sobbing, "Please, I beg you, I will change. I will do anything, anything for forgiveness. Spare me. Give me another chance. Let me live." His words tumbled out, frantic and broken, as thunder roared overhead and the rain lashed at his face. Suddenly, lightning struck again, brighter and closer than before. The alley melted away, and Hans found himself standing in a yard, the grass slick and shining beneath the storm. In the center of the yard sat a rock, rough and ancient. Another crash of lightning transformed the rock into a gravestone, cold and unyielding, with letters carved deep into its surface. Hans stepped forward, trembling, and read the inscription, "Hans Scrooge, born," and the date, followed by a chilling epitaph. He died because he disrespected the Jewish religion and people with a cold heart. The words stared back at him, an accusation written in stone. Hans looked up, pleading with the Angel of Death, who now raised its scythe high, the blade glinting with finality. Hans threw himself forward, hands outstretched, voice raw and pleading. "I will become a good Jewish man. I will rewrite my scripture. I will sponge my hatred from every wall in town. I will do mitzvot. I will honor my family, my neighbors, my faith. Please, let me change. Don't let it end like this." The Reaper paused, silent and unmoving. Then, with a swift motion, the scythe came down, and Hans felt cold darkness enfold him. He gasped, expecting oblivion, expecting an eternity of regret and punishment. But in the next instant, Hans awoke, breathless, in his own bed. The chill of the grave had vanished. The shadows were gone. He sat up, blinking, as the first rays of dawn crept across the floorboards. The storm had passed, and outside, the world was washed clean, the sun rising with gentle promise. Hans lay there for a moment, the memory of the night still clinging to him like the traces of a nightmare. He touched his face, still damp with tears, and listened to the quiet morning. The dread that had haunted him was gone, replaced by a growing warmth, a sense of hope and possibility. He realized that the future was not yet written, and that redemption was within his grasp. If only he had the courage to reach for it. He rose, determined to make amends, to live with compassion and respect, to honor both tradition and community. The lessons of the night, of the ghosts of Kippur, of the Reaper, of the prayers and gravestone were etched into his heart, guiding him toward a new beginning. In that moment, Hans Scrooge understood that the path to forgiveness was not found in fear or regret, but in the choices he would make from that day forward. The sun continued to rise, and Hans stepped into the light, ready to change, ready to embrace the mitzvot, ready to rewrite his own story.